Welcome to Life, Death, and the Law, presented by the law firm of Deason, Garner, and Hansen, hosted by attorneys Shawn Garner and Adam Hansen.
Welcome to Life, Death, and the Law. I'm Shawn Garner, an attorney with Deason, Garner, and Hansen, in studio here with Adam Hansen, my partner, and also Cody Beeson, who is running the boards. Across the table, we have a new associate attorney with Deason, Garner, and Hansen. Good morning, Thomas Sparks. Welcome to the table.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to talk a little bit about Border Patrol, transgender, everything you hear every day in the news. But we want to start off with an interview that is not happening and why it's not happening. So Cody, bring us up to date on the school district and what's going on with boys trying to get into girls' bathrooms and vice versa.
Oh, mercy. Well, we asked the school district to come on and just do a comment on why they have an outside opinion, and they basically referred us to that attorney. So
do we know generally what their opinion is about their birth, sex, and how that is going to apply to what bathroom they use?
You know, I just know what we discussed a month or two ago here, and it was Tom Horn, the superintendent of education for the state, had a blanket opinion that covered the state. And then the school district in Yuma decided to get a counter opinion.
Yeah, so Tom Horn gives them
attorney.
Right. So let's go into Tom Horn's decision a little bit.
Yeah.
What was his opinion?
I believe he said boys are boys and girls are girls, and that's what it is. I believe. I mean, I'm just summing it up.
Mind blowing.
Yeah.
And so boys should use which bathroom?
The ones for males.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And girls?
Females.
Yeah.
Okay. And then that's it, period. Like, there's no third or fourth or fifth option.
Well, okay. Well, that just seems too easy. So the Yuma Union decided to go contrary, or at least wanted their own opinion. And if they didn't agree, or if they did agree with that opinion, then they wouldn't potentially seek a second opinion. So they hired an attorney. We're going to use the very limited funds that we have for our schools to hire an attorney to contradict Tom Horn's very common sense approach that boys should use boys' bathrooms and girls should use girls' bathrooms. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's it. I mean, and I kind of want to get these guys on here. I mean,
Well, shouldn't we invite them?
We did invite them, and the response is, here's the attorneys. I don't like doing that because now, you know, somebody's going to get a bill for that. It's going to be the school district. It's going to be the taxpayer. So that's really not fair that a taxpayer has to foot the bill for somebody else's, you know.
So we've reached out to the school district. We've asked them to give their opinion, to get their side of the story and describe why this is becoming such an issue, why we have to spend so much time and resources instead of learning math and science in schools, focusing on what bathroom to use. And they declined to come in and voice their opinion, which just perpetuates the problem even further. So there's that. Moving on to the border and the continuing saga that we have there. We've got an interview from Jonathan Lyons, who, unless you've been hiding under a rock, you've heard his name. He's involved. He's the owner of Lyons and Lundgren Roofing and Insulation, but he's so involved with politics. He's got the governor, when Governor Ducey he had on speed dial. I'm sure he doesn't have Governor Hobbs on speed dial, but he is also a county supervisor and very involved in the politics on the ground in Yuma, and he takes them all the way up to Congress. He when President Trump comes into town, he's the main contact. When congressmen come into town, he's the one that chauffeurs them around. And he was interviewed on Fox, last week. So, Adam, do you have that to play?
Yeah, I'll pull it up.
Lyons, Yuma County Supervisor, and get your reaction to that exclusive video that we had yesterday of just, it's like so brazen and so easy to cross our border and have no consequences.
It's a lot of what we've been seeing over the past 3 years. The areas continue to change. There's an ebb and a flow. Once Border Patrol identifies an area, they build it up. The cartels absolutely understand that Border Patrol is there simply to process, and it's very frustrating as you see these areas change. We had a record number of people come over across the border in December, and the numbers continue to go up every single month.
Jonathan, do you support the impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas?
You know, I spoke with a few congressmen yesterday. They told me they were working on the markups. I think that's a great place to start. However, he's doing the bidding of whomever he is taking his orders from, whether it be the president or whoever's managing the president. That's where it needs to stop. The president does have the power to shut this down. It's well within his right. He doesn't need to wait for Congress to send him something. I have seen them act, and I have seen inaction from this administration. We have 3 of 11 areas in Yuma that have been fenced or walled by this administration. I know that they have the ability to do it. It's whether or not they have the desire to do it.
I'm curious about what you think is happening. You mentioned to our producers that you wonder why this isn't happening in New Mexico. Do you have a view on that? Because we interviewed the former governor of New Mexico yesterday, Susana Martinez. She says they are having problems from immigrants, but it doesn't seem like we hear a lot about that. And I wonder why as well. Do you have a theory?
I don't, other than maybe they're targeting Arizona and Texas, which are 2 red states. You know, most of those people end up in Yuma. Our numbers are down. We're averaging between 200 and 300 a day. However, we receive bilateral transfers from California, from Texas, and from the Tucson sector, 600 to 800 individuals a day. So on an average, we're still seeing that 1,000 people a day that are being processed here in Yuma. And now this administration is proposing to build a 100,000 square foot permanent processing center here and in Laredo, Texas, which is very frustrating. So they're planning on long term. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're saying it will be a permanent processing center right there where you are?
Yeah, they've actually acquired an old swap meet, which was an old Greyhound racing park here next door to Homeland Security. Wow. The ink is probably drying right now, according to Border Patrol. Border Patrol recommended that they build it in a different municipality just because Yuma lacks the resources. However, they are going to build a permanent processing center here in Yuma and Laredo, Texas.
I know you're watching what's happening in Texas with Governor Greg Abbott here, but I just want to go back to this video for one more point here. California has a wall. It's 160 miles long, okay? But in this portion, really it's the desert. There's nothing out there. The wall stops, and you can see the concertina wires. They walk through there. What strikes me, Jonathan, is that the cartels know every square foot of our border, and they know exactly where to go to deliver their human goods and get the money that is coming for them.
I've been out with DEA, I've been out with Border Patrol, been out with the sheriff. They have lookouts in the mountains. Every time we focus on one area, they move the traffic to another area. This is a very difficult area to access up in the mountains. It is very rocky, and they have to have some type of infrastructure built on the backside of those mountains in order to get there. I travel through this area on the freeway to San Diego almost monthly, and it is an extremely hostile environment. Probably the traffic will again change to the lower altitude once summer hits, and it becomes a little bit more difficult because of the weather in that area to come across. But the cartel knows exactly what they're doing. We talk about, you know, the human trafficking, the drug trafficking, and those numbers continue to climb.
Well,
Jonathan, thank you.
Terrific guest. Good luck down there in Yuma. We'll follow it.
Thank you very much.
Jonathan Lyons. Thank you.
Well, what do you think about that, Shawn?
Well, what strikes me at first is I wish our administration could be as organized as the cartels, because they seem to have their stuff together. And they know how to move people. They know how to stop people. They know how to get things done. We're up against a private sector that is actually highly efficient. Unfortunately, it's a criminal organization, and we don't seem to be very motivated to stop it. Not only that, it seems that we're empowering it by building the permanent structures. It's just another signal out there that this policy of allowing unchecked crossings from who knows who across the border is going to continue indefinitely.
I mean, this isn't that bad. At least under the Obama administration, they provided them firepower and weapons. So this is a step back,
So there was the Fast
you're
and
talking
Furious.
about Fast and Furious.
Yeah.
I mean, we've done
We laugh
work.
about it, but somebody died because of that.
No,
Exactly.
yeah.
So, the Obama administration, for those of you that haven't followed that, they supplied the cartels. They wanted to mark these guns and show how dangerous these guns were going to be in the hands of the wrong people. So they gave them to the wrong people. And then they were going to supposedly track them down and prosecute them, but they didn't. The guns stayed in the hands of the wrong people and then were used against our citizens and our law enforcement, and it turned out tragic.
So in comparison, not that bad.
Yeah. Well, the amount of people that have crossed the border in the Biden administration will have exceeded the population of 30 separate states individually. So more people have crossed the border than are populated in 30 different states: Arizona, Utah, Idaho, North and South Dakota, Montana. And I was doing the numbers a little bit ago. You could do a corridor with a connection of states from the southern border, and these are big states, on the western coast, all the way up to the northern border of Canada. And if you took just immigrants, you would have a greater population in those states by the people that have immigrated during this administration than currently exists there.
And then you have crazy states like New York that want to give them driver's licenses and IDs.
Yeah.
And
so you've heard about the new municipal law in New York, or ordinance, I should say, in New York, that they're not allowing the buses to enter New York without a manifesto of who's on the bus and, get this, documentation of those individuals who are on the bus. And unless they have that, then they have to give the authorities 36 hours, I think it is 36 hours in advance notice, because there is a human rights ordinance in New York that everybody is entitled to shelter. And so in order to provide them with those human rights, they need to prepare for it. But they don't give us that same notice, of course. They allow our border here to be perpetrated. And what's interesting is they don't allow those buses to come across. And so what the bus companies have done, they're stuck there in Connecticut, New Jersey. So they just stop at the border. They give their passengers train passes, tram passes, and let them enter New York that way. And it really is ticking off the mayor and the city council of New York, because they're saying, hey, you guys are violating the law by doing this. We have a law, and you got to operate by the law. Well, guess what? You just became a border state. How does that feel?
And what a great way to enter New York, by rail,
Yeah.
It makes for the experience.
And
Done it.
Very scenic, yes.
I've done it from New Jersey.
Yeah. You know what? That's the American,
The turnpike is terrible.
Yeah.
So, switching gears a little bit here, it's often been said by Republican governors and candidates for governors. I know Carrie Lake, this was a big thing that she stumped on, was that she would declare an invasion and invoke Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution to protect the borders of the state of Arizona if she was elected governor. Now, this has happened in Texas with Governor Greg Abbott. Thomas, you did a little research on that. What did you find?
Yeah, so the issue's been in the news a lot, but some of the ground play is a little bit nuanced. So I wanted to kind of dig into the court cases that both the federal government and the state of Texas have both filed. So what I found is, people know that Texas is putting up concertina wire, or C wire for short.
Yeah, and honestly, we can call it what it is. It's razor wire, and it seems like we try to avoid clean descriptions when it doesn't feel good or look to be in our favor. But we need to get back to just calling things what they are. This is razor wire. You know, it's sharp wire for the purpose of keeping people out. Otherwise, it's going to cause bodily injury.
Right. And they're doing that on Texas land, which they presumably are allowed to do. It's their state, their property. Put up a fence if you want.
Yeah, and they're building them on top of these Connex boxes, these container boxes. So they're throwing these boxes down on the border. They're cheap, easy to move, and then on top of those, they're putting these big strings of razor wire.
Right. And by doing that, the hope, and it seems to be pretty effective, it's stopping people from crossing the border, which is what they want. Now, the federal government's angle is that under the law of, let's see, I think I had the reference here, 8 U.S.C. 1103, it gives the federal government the ability to navigate the border, and especially even on private land within 25 miles of the southern border. So even if you're a rancher or something, due to that federal law, agents can come onto your land, and for the purpose of fulfilling their duties, however, that's the caveat. They need to be fulfilling their duties, patrolling, apprehending, interviewing, and sending people to the proper ports of entry. I think that was contemplated when the law was established. That's what they would be doing. So now...
And there's plenty of them. I think there's 13 ports of entry in Texas.
28
okay.
along this stretch
Wow.
of the border we're talking about. And that's not even the whole state of Texas. So it's just in the area in question, there's many ports of entry. So
they have an ability to go there and to talk to the individuals that allow them to do it legally. It's just much easier when they follow the cartel's instructions.
Sure, and to bypass any sort of interview process that may take place much easier.
But they do go through an interview process with the Border Patrol.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the whole point, is Greg Abbott wants them to be stopped and turned back to go through the proper ports of entry, and President Biden wants them to be allowed to pass and have the Border Patrol turned into just a processing agency that says, okay, you have the correct wording that says you're seeking asylum, that you're being persecuted because of your religious beliefs or your political beliefs, and your life is in danger. Okay, you can come across. So that is the loophole, essentially, that people are taking advantage of. They're saying, we are being persecuted in our country, and therefore we're just seeking safety, asylum, kind of like Snowden did when he was being persecuted by the United States for telling the world that they were spying on everybody. Mm-hmm. And so Russia gave him asylum. That works. That actually fulfilled the purpose of that whole law. But here, everybody's been given leaflets to know exactly what to say, so they can apply for asylum. But asylum, it takes a hearing in a court, and we all know that courts take years to have that process go through. So they're given a court date, and that is the processing. That is what is occurring in processing. They're taking a name, whatever name is given, because a lot of the time they leave their ID and all of their personal effects on the south side of that wall. I've been to the wall and I've seen it. It's just cluttered with identification of the people crossing, because they don't want to be known where they came from or who they are, and they're getting processed as whatever name they want to give, and given a cell phone, given a debit card, and given a ticket to the destination of their choice. Sorry to interrupt with that, but...
Well, that accurately, I think, sums up the process. So obviously, from the perspective of the migrant, it would be a lot better for them to be able to skip that whole process and just come straight through. So Texas's main gripe that they took to the appeals court to get an injunction which would prevent the federal government from cutting their wire is that they're saying, we don't care if you cut the wire if it's for fulfilling your duties or responding to medical emergencies. Like if someone's drowning in the river, of course you need to go cut that and go save their life. We want to preserve life. That's what we're about. But the issue is they think that they're not acting in good faith. And it seems that there's actually some video evidence that came up to the appeals court that I'll read real quick. They said on September 20th, an incident that was captured on video, that in that incident, Border Patrol agents cut 2 additional holes in the sea wire 15 feet away from an existing hole and installed a climbing rope for migrants. Meanwhile, a Border Patrol boat passively observed a stream of migrants crossing the river, who were never interviewed, questioned as to citizenship, or in any way hindered in their process into the United States. Instead, after letting the migrants through, the Border Patrol sent them to walk as much as a mile or more with no supervision in hopes they would proceed to the nearest immigration processing center. And then later in the testimony in that court case, it says the aliens coming through the holes were merely waved along in the hope that they would flow in an orderly manner. Agents let some 4,500 migrants in on that day, but only 2,600 presented themselves for processing. So somewhere down the line, we lost about 2,000 people from the hole in the wall where a rope was provided to the actual checkpoint that they were supposed to go to. So you can see why Texas may be a little bit miffed when they're saying, we just want you to let us know when you're cutting the wire so we can go back and fix it, and we want it to be for a legitimate purpose. We don't want you cutting extra holes and putting ropes across and letting people, hopefully get to a border checkpoint without any supervision. And I think that's reasonable.
Well, especially because Texas hasn't taken the position that it's a sanctuary state, whereas New York has, and these other jurisdictions have. We got to take a break. This is Life, Death, and the Law.
You're listening to Life, Death, and the Law, presented by Deason, Garner, and Hansen, the law firm that has been voted Yuma's best 6 years in a row.
Welcome back to Life, Death, and the Law. We're talking about the tired issue of the endless stream of illegal immigrants coming across the border. Some are being processed. The efficiency of that process is totally unknown because, like I mentioned before, many of them leave their IDs on the south side of the wall before they pass, or on the south side of the river, whatever they're coming across. And so they're not going to be properly identified as to who they are. But we've got states like Texas who have not adopted this policy of being a sanctuary state or jurisdiction where people are welcome regardless of their immigration status. New York, California are states that have implemented those types of policies, yet they haven't done, it seems like when it comes to actual on-the-ground practice, New York is upset about the amount of immigrants that are coming in. And it's a drop in the bucket compared to what these states, Arizona, Texas, these border states are experiencing. I know I was listening to an interview of the mayor of New York just the other day, and he said, we've had 50,000 people come in the past year, and we don't have the infrastructure for that many people in that short a time. We had 50,000 people in 1 month, and we're not quite the size of New York City. So it's beyond hypocritical for them to say this. Plus, we haven't adopted the policy that immigrants of any status are welcome. Immigrants of legal status, absolutely welcome. Of course, I follow the motto, imprinted on the Statue of Liberty, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. But when I drive down the street on 4th Avenue, and I see a lot of people that it's very clear have just crossed the border, are going through the processing. I know what hotels are being used for shelter for these immigrants. And I witness 18 to 35-year-old men, majority of the time, a vast majority of the time. And we've seen these clips on the news, a vast majority of the time. It's not poor, tired, huddled masses yearning to be free. It's young men looking for a better opportunity, which lends itself in a free handout in a country that has no laws regarding immigration.
Well, we have laws, and that's part of the issue.
Or enforcement.
So one of the things, going back to the first segment, we played that clip from Jonathan Lyons, who's on the Board of Supervisors here in Yuma County, and he was on Fox. Again, in that interview, he mentioned that because they brought up, well, what about Mayorkas? Have you heard about his impeachment articles that have been filed? And Jonathan said something to the extent that he had heard about that, and they asked if he supported that. I don't think he ever said, but he deflected and said, well, it really goes up to the top. Basically, the President of the United States is over these issues, and he's exactly right. So the executive branch, going back to Constitution, right? What is that, Article 2 of the Constitution sets forth the duties of our President of the United States. He's the commander-in-chief over the armies. He's also over the enforcement of federal law. So he's the police. The executive branch is the police of the United States of America. And when there is a law that's set forth by the legislature, which there has been since our existence, especially in the immigration realm, if he is not enforcing that, then he's now subject to impeachment. That is also set forth in that Article 2 of our Constitution. I think it's Section 4 is the impeachment grounds. So he only has a few things that are expressly detailed, he or she, whoever the U.S. president is, in our Constitution. There's not very many of them, and that was on purpose because the framers didn't want one individual branch to have too much power. And so for the executive branch, what were they worried about? Him becoming like a king, because that's what they're trying to get out of. And so they really were limiting the acts of the United States president to be really a foreign dignitary, diplomat to other nations. He's the face of the United States of America. He has a lot of leeway when it comes to treaties and charters with other nations. That's built into our Constitution. He has the ability to command our armies and send them out to go to war, to declare war. But even the declaration of war has to be shared with Congress. Congress has to actually issue the declaration of war, and then the executive branch can now act upon that and send out the armies. And Tom, you're familiar with this. You probably have more insight to this because you know all about military law. You're a JAG lawyer. So, the commander-in-chief, he's over all that. Am I correct?
Yeah. Even he can establish unilateral control of the military for a limited amount of time. I believe it's in 60 or 90 days where the president, without the act of Congress, can go and take troops abroad.
Yeah, but it's limited.
Oh, yeah, definitely limited.
But it doesn't mean that he doesn't have that power. So he only has certain powers under the Constitution. There have been some other powers that maybe it's been really squishy over the jurisprudence in our nation since the beginning. And that really came into play when we had president elections and things like that, where you had a vice president or a candidate that didn't like how the outcome was, or there's vying for power and position. And so through case law, we've got some other things that have kind of come up, but they really don't have a swath of power to do a lot of stuff. But one of the biggest things that the president has is the ability to police us on the federal level. In other words, he has the authority and the duty to enforce federal law. That is his duty. And when you are not enforcing federal law, you are in derelict of duty, and you are now threatened with impeachment. So those are all articles that could be used to, if you can impeach Mayorkas, you most definitely can impeach the president of the United States easily. If impeachment is going to be done to Mayorkas, then you need to do it to Biden, is my argument, because he's at the top. He's the one, Mayorkas is just a director of an agency that he appointed to that position. But Mayorkas, that's not where the buck stops. It stops at the United States president. He has the duty expressly written in the Constitution to enforce federal law. The law being, one of them being, it's, what is it? Shawn, you know off the top of your head? Of course you do.
What?
USC 1325, improper entry by an alien. You
Sure.
knew that law. I could see it in your eyes.
I was shocked that not everybody knew it.
Any alien who enters or attempts to enter the United States at any time or place other than as designated by immigration officers, I'm guessing that port of entry probably is what that's been interpreted as,
Ellis Island.
or eludes examination or inspection, so you sneak across the border by immigration officers, or attempts to enter or obtains entry to the United States by a willfully false or misleading representation or the willful concealment of a material fact, shall, for the first commission, so if you do this once, the first commission, be fined. Like, there is no leeway here. It's not like, oh, maybe you get fined. You get fined and under Title 18 or imprisoned for not more than 6 months, or both. And for a second or a repeated offense, then you're fined under Title 18 or imprisoned not more than 2 years, or both. So that is the federal law that's been on the books for probably over a century, and the president has to enforce that. that is his legal duty as you president of the United States. He might not like it, and apparently he does not, but that does not give him a right to not enforce federal law. If he doesn't like it, then he has to get to work with the legislature, and they have to put together a plan to undo or to change a law that he might not love. But he can't just say, I'm not going to enforce that. That technically is illegal when it comes to the presidency.
And so I agree with all that, and I want to get back to this decision then. I don't understand how the Supreme Court has sided with the Biden administration in prohibiting Governor Abbott in Texas from defending his own state from an invasion. And we know that in the Bill of Rights in the 9th and 10th Amendment, it specifically states that any rights not specifically given to the federal government are reserved to the people and to the states. The states are entering into this contract with the union, that the union's going to protect all of us collectively and our outer borders from a foreign invasion. And for doing that, we're going to have an allegiance with the entire body, with the national government. Now, even simplify it a little bit further. This government is of the people, by the people, for the people, meaning, let's break that down a little bit. What does that mean? It means that the people are elected as representatives by the people, so we're the ones electing them, and it's for the people. The only rights that the government has are rights that we have, and those rights stem from who, Adam?
Our Creator.
Our Creator. They're inalienable rights. They're not coming from the government. There are rights given from God that cannot be taken care of now, or taken away. Now, we can delegate certain duties and jobs to make sure that our rights are not infringed. And so I don't have to stand at my door of my house with a pistol all the time protecting my property and my family. I can delegate that to a police force. And so the police can protect my property. They can arrest people for breaking the laws that would infringe upon my rights to have a productive life in society. And that's what we've done with all areas of the government. We've delegated our rights to the government. So they cannot do anything that we couldn't do personally. So when they don't do what we've delegated them the right to do, which is enforce the borders and our property, then we take that right back and we want to enforce it. And that's the way I read the Constitution. Otherwise, it would have no meaning. In fact, the Bill of Rights was not in the original Constitution. The Constitution was ratified reluctantly in 1787. So 11 years after the Declaration of Independence. And the Bill of Rights wasn't adopted until 3 years later. And there was a lot of arguments, including Alexander Hamilton, arguing against the Bill of Rights because he thought that it would give the government wiggle room to say, well, you've given us all of these, or you've reserved these specific rights against unlawful search and seizure and against impeding on freedom of speech and the practice of religion. So everything else we can do. And Alexander Hamilton wanted to make it very clear, no, we can do everything. We want to make it very, very clear that you can't impede specifically on these rights, but it's all rights we have, and we want to make very clear that you cannot do these things. But by stating these things and enumerating them, it possibly could give the argument that the ones that aren't stated aren't protected, and that's certainly not the case. So you did a little research on this in the case law that was brought by the Biden administration, and what did you find?
Well, let's go to break. We'll talk about that in just a minute, Tom. So hold that thought. We're going to come back, and we'll get back into this opinion. This is Texas versus the U.S., right? It's going to be a war. Finally, Texas is going to secede from the Union. Every year they threaten. This is it. You heard it here first.
Coming up, more thought-provoking conversations on life, death, and the law right after this.
Welcome back. You're listening to Life, Death, and Law. I'm attorney Adam Hansen. I'm with my partner in crime, Shawn Garner, to my side here. And then we've got our new associate attorney that works for us here in the office, Tom Sparks. You go by Thomas or Tom?
I usually do both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because there was something swirling around the office. They're like, no, he goes by Thomas. And I said, well, I don't want to call him Thomas.
Yeah, I mean, either one of those will work.
Okay.
Yeah,
just be honest. You don't have to be shy about it. So anyway, Shawn tasked him. First task, when he came to our office, he said, Tom, I think we've got a war on our hands between the Texas military and the United States of America. You didn't say that, did you, Shawn?
No.
Yeah, you did. And so if you've been watching the news or paying attention to the news these last couple of weeks, Texas Governor Greg Abbott had instructed his people to put up fencing.
Well, it's the Texas National Guard, it's the state troopers, and some sheriffs.
Sheriffs, yeah, the sheriff department. So he is the executive in that particular state, so he has policing power, just like we talked about before on the U.S. Scale. In Texas alone, he's the executive, so he can say, hey, we need to protect our sovereign and our citizens, and the way that we're going to do that is we're going to put up fencing to do that. My understanding, so Shawn, before the break, you made a comment or your analysis of this case where the federal government, the Supreme Court just recently heard this case, and they said something like, my understanding, I understood it different than you did, Shawn. It wasn't that they said they didn't come down on Texas. My understanding was they just didn't make a decision either way. They're like, well, Texas, yeah, you have the authority to put up fences and protect yourselves. And federal government, yeah, you have the ability to take those fences down because you're exclusively in charge of immigration enforcement. So it's like a no-win for anybody. So Texas can continue to put up fences and the federal government can continue to take them down. But nobody's in trouble, right? Is that my understanding of how it all panned out?
Well, that's not my understanding, because I've seen what's happening right now. And what's going on is the Border Patrol is removing that razor wire, and they're saying under the Biden administration's instructions, it's impeding our ability to carry out our duties, which their duties have totally been flipped 180 degrees. Their duties are to prevent the illegal entry of aliens that haven't gone through the port of entry and obtained legal status. And so Biden administration has turned the Border Patrol, and this is no disrespect to the Border Patrol, but just into a bunch of paper pushers and civil servants for the federal government to process anybody that shows up to the Mexican border. That's not what they signed up for. These guys are trained. They go through a lot of rigorous physical exercises to chase down the bad guys and keep them out of our country and make sure that law-abiding citizens know where to go. Now, in this case, they're taking everybody and they're processing them. And, of course, a lot of them, like Thomas just explained, don't even get processed because they don't go through the processing center when they're asked to politely stand in line.
But Texas can go right behind him and put it back up. The Supreme Court didn't tell them, "Oh, you can't do that, Texas." So we can play this game back and forth.
Well, actually, the Supreme Court didn't say anything, and that's the point. That's the irritation here. The Supreme Court denied an actual review of the case, and so they're not going to hear it again. So they're going to uphold the Fifth Circuit's opinion. So the Fifth Circuit's opinion now becomes essentially the holding by the Supreme Court.
Which says that...
Well, so the court case is not completely done yet.
Okay.
So what the Fifth Circuit did is they issued a preliminary injunction against the federal government from cutting razor wire in the case, unless it was for a medical emergency or exigent circumstances. They can still cut it in those regards.
Well, that's a win.
Yeah, so what happened was, and you don't issue a preliminary injunction unless the court thinks that that party is going to win in the end anyway. So that's kind of the Fifth Circuit showing their hand, saying that, hey, Texas, we think you're in the right because we're going to, before the case is over, say, federal government, you cannot cut this wire. Now, what the government did as a result of that is they did an emergency appeal up to the Supreme Court and asked, hey, Supreme Court, can you overrule that ruling because we think it's wrong while this is all pending? So the Supreme Court, by a 5-4 decision, said, yes, we think that's wrong. You can go ahead and continue to cut the wire, but that is while the court case is still in the process. So it is very
So
possible.
they're not taking a side one way or the other. They're just saying, Border Patrol, you can do whatever you think's necessary, and we're not going to support the injunction.
Right.
Okay.
While the court case is still pending. So it's very possible that in the near future, the Fifth Circuit decides the case and sides with Texas again in the final. And what we would expect to happen is the government would then appeal to the Supreme Court.
And now they have to.
Now they
make a decision.
have to decide it. They can't punt anymore. So, but people may have been surprised to see which justices
I was.
sided on which side. And I was too initially, but when I read the nuances of the case, it makes a little bit more sense. Because
I mean, which justices, right? Let's point them out. Amy Coney Barrett, right?
What side was she on?
She was on the side of vacating the injunction.
so allowing the federal government to continue to cut the fence.
So before we go too much further here, you made a comment the last segment about the federal government and why are they even involved in immigration. They might not explicitly say it in our Constitution, but I don't remember exactly all the case law. But I remember in law school, we came across cases that established that the federal government is exclusively in charge of immigration enforcement.
Yes.
The Supreme Court gave them that power. I don't know. I don't remember why or when. Something comes to mind, something about California. I think it was a California case many years ago. And so it's not that it's explicitly or expressly written in our Constitution. It's just the Supreme Court has determined that the federal government is exclusively in charge of immigration. It's a federal-only issue. And the case was between another state or maybe multiple states, and the states lost. They were trying to kind of enforce immigration in their own states, and the Supreme Court in that case law ultimately concluded that no, states do not have the rights to enforce national immigration policies. Only the federal government does. So I'm really sorry to interrupt you. I say that because when you talk about Amy Coney Barrett, that she's extremely conservative is my understanding, but she's incredibly smart. Mm-hmm. And she is also one that follows the case law. She follows the doctrine of stare decisis. Mm-hmm. So she'll look at past cases and what has been said before in the courts, and she's probably going to tend to go along with that so long as it comports with the Constitution.
Yeah, as long as it's not in direct contradiction to the Constitution.
So on its face, you might be surprised, well, she's super conservative. Why is she doing this kind of thing? But it must be, she must have seen something where she's thinking these arguments somehow have support from years past and stare decisis is my guess.
And that's exactly what I found when I was doing that research, is that it went a little deeper.
For the record, I told Thomas when I asked him to do the research, I said, I'm surprised she decided this way, although I'd like you to find out a little bit more because I understand that she's brilliant and I'm borderline incompetent on some issues. And so I want to know. I want to know a little bit more about it.
Sure. So from the limited, so not all the opinions are published. So this is limited research because, like I said, the Supreme Court hasn't issued an opinion on why they chose to vacate it yet. And the court case isn't even done. It's still in the Fifth Circuit being, argued currently. But what we do have is that the federal government's position, like I said, was we have federal statutes that say, especially within 25 miles of the border, north of the southern border, we can even go on private property to do our job. So it would stand to reason that they can also go onto Texas state property to do their job. But that's the caveat, is they need to be doing their job.
Yeah.
And Texas, go ahead.
To Adam, he stated, where is it in the Constitution? It's in Article 4, Section 4, that the United States shall guarantee every state in this union a republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion. So that's where it says. So what it is assigning the United States a duty to do that. And what it's being interpreted wrongly is that they are the only ones that can do that. And that's where Greg Abbott comes up with Article 1, Section 10 that says, no state without consent of Congress shall enter into war unless actually invaded or such imminent danger as will not admit a delay. And so Greg Abbott is saying, hey, we have to engage in war on the border right now because we're being invaded. And I think that it's clear as day that that's the case. So both the federal government has a duty, but not the exclusive right, and Article 1, Section 10 is the state of Texas also has a right to wage war against this invasion of illegal immigrants.
So I think that where that gets us is what Adam was saying earlier. You've got Texas, who can put up fences because they want to protect themselves, but then you've got another avenue where the federal government can cut them in the name of doing their job. And I think my guess is what we'll see in the Supreme Court case, if I could try to call my shot early, and people can listen and verify if I was right or wrong, is that the Supreme Court will eventually say it's not the right venue, like injunction is not the right remedy for this issue. What probably is the correct remedy is impeachment, whereas the government can cut these fences, because if we had a scenario where a drug cartel was on the run making their way into the interior of the country, no one would argue that the federal government couldn't cut the wire to go run them down. The issue is people are upset that they're not doing their job in cutting the wire. They're cutting it for what it seems to be for the purpose of letting people in on purpose. So that's really the issue. And what's the remedy to that? It's firing the people who aren't doing their job in securing the border, which would start with...
And I disagree. I think the remedy of that is Article 1, Section 10, waging war on the people that are invading, the state doing it on an individual basis, and saying, government, you had your chance to do it, now we're going to do it.
Well, I think there could be a hybrid approach.
That's a little extreme, isn't it?
No, it is a war. When people flood into our country illegally, what is a war in all traditional senses, right? It's when you invade another country. When one country invades another country, or when a group of people invade another country. They're invading our sovereign border here, and we need to create, by means of force, a way to stop them from doing it until we establish law and order again.
I would go for that. I think there should be a hybrid approach, though, so where Texas can protect itself and say, hey, we are being invaded. We've got a right, a contractual right, that the government's not holding up their end of the bargain, so we get to, create self-help and deal with that issue. But I think the long-term solution is get back to making the laws that have been working in the country for 200 some odd years work, whereas that means someone's not doing their job right, because this hasn't been a problem in the past, 1900s, this isn't really much of an issue. It's only been quite recently in our nation's history that this is such a hot-button issue. And to me, that's evidence that somebody's just not putting the system to work correctly.
Yeah, it smells like incompetence, right?
Yeah.
So maybe impeachment is a remedy, maybe
I don't think impeachment is a remedy, because impeachment is too difficult.
It might be a practical remedy.
Or an election.
It's impossible.
Yeah. So the voters will decide, if this is a hot-button issue enough. Will they kick out the current administration or not? That's the beauty of our democracy, our democratic republic, excuse me.
Okay. And I know we're short on time, but I just want to get out there how difficult impeachment is, right? You only need a majority of Congress to impeach, and that's easy to do, and that's why, Trump was impeached twice, and a third time it was pending while he was leaving office. But
removal's the issue, is what you're saying. It's easy to impeach, hard to remove.
Well, right. The Senate has to convict of that impeachment. So an impeachment is basically an indictment. It's basically saying, was there a crime? Is there evidence of a crime that occurred? Okay. Yes, there was. And so now we're going to go to the trial portion of it. The trial portion of it gets to the Senate, and now we have to get, I can't remember if it's 2/3 or 3/4 of the Senate, but they have to agree that that crime was committed by the person impeached. And so the person indicted. And in the case of Trump, him. In the case of Biden, with his impeachment. There is no way that we have that type of majority as far as the Republicans. And even if we did, not all would line up to impeach the president. So getting him out of office by virtue of impeachment is an impractical way of looking about it. I think the states need to have an alternative way to secure their own borders.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think, like I said, in the interim, I'm happy to back Texas securing their border. I just think taking the
and
whole...
Arizona.
And Arizona especially. I just think taking the whole pie in that you don't get to cut our wire either, even though there's a legal law on the books for you to be able to do it. That's a tall ask. And I think maybe impeachment's not the full way. Maybe the election is the foolproof way to change things. Like you can elect incompetence out much easier, much less often, but much easier than impeaching it.
And
out.
again, I disagree. We have an executive because we need somebody to be able to act swiftly, and enforce laws. We can't act swiftly when the president is elected for a 4-year term. We can't, by votes, act swiftly. That's impossible, and we've seen that. We've been invaded by 12 million illegal immigrants.
I don't think it's one or the other. I think what you're saying is it's all of these things. You're impeaching.
Yeah,
It's going to the polls. It's the states taking on more of what they feel empowered to do. I would add to it that you just back the wall up 25 miles.
So if someone's breaking into your house, Adam, you say, well, if the sheriff's department's not going to come and defend me against this person that has invaded my house, let's next round for the election for sheriff, let's vote him out.
Definitely.
Yeah, well, good luck when that person has now looted your entire house and your kids are dead.
Yeah, but
Come and take it.
But we're saying that Adam would fire back. Adam would return fire.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Texas needs to return fire.
And they're in their right to now. I think they can do that. It's just I think what's frustrating is that they seem to have an entity that's slowing them down in their defense because they're trying to put up this wire, and the federal government's cutting holes in it, seemingly to make it ineffective.
Going back to Adam's house, you put up a wall, and the sheriff says, "Hey, there's a path of illegal immigrants, and you live out in the counties where they go through. No, you're impeding their path. You got to take down that wall."
I agree. I'm not saying you're not right.
Good, because I am right.
I know. You're always right. We got to go. This is Life, Death, and the Law.